5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Fitter and Faster Coaches Corner. I'm your host, as always, Mike Murray. Today, I'm thrilled to have a guest from the University of Michigan, Jim Richardson, who coached there for many, many years. Jim has played a role in multiple capacities in USA Swimming and the American Swim Coaches Association over the course of a very long and storied career. Jim, I'm going to really try today not to get into too many fishing stories because I know we'd probably end up being here all day, but
Yeah.
it's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure, Mike.
I grew up with a special affinity for Michigan and Michigan athletics. My father is an alum of the law school. So we grew up going to Ann Arbor on many trips. I've spent many Saturdays there. And as a young swimmer growing up, he would bring me over to Canham. So I probably watched some of your practices as an 8, 9, 10-year-old without you even knowing it. And the same goes for Irby. We had Irby on earlier in the year. And then you and I have a really interesting connection because the last time you and I were together, and this is going to date both of us, this was my third year coaching at Marist, and you and I were having breakfast with Larry Van Wagner down in Puerto Rico.
Yes. Yes.
That's the last time we were together. So it's great to see you. You know, I've seen you on a couple pool decks since then, but I wanted to start today with one of the things that you're most well known for is developing close bonds and relationships with your athletes that help guide them towards a really successful adult life. So the lessons that they learned while swimming for you at Michigan carry over into their adult life. Why has compassion and empathy been such an important part of your coaching over the course of the last 3 or 4 decades?
You know, I don't know. I think a lot of it is tied to your personality for sure. It's about wanting to have a meaningful relationship with your student athletes and with your athletes in general, so that the level of communication is not just on the surface level, but it encompasses what's going on with them as a human being, in addition to obviously what's happening with respect to their swimming, because, you know, everybody leaves swimming as a competitor sooner or later. And my take on it has been, what did swimming give you that's transferable into your life, not only while you're swimming, but especially after you're through swimming? All of the attributes that you can gain from having a great swimming experience, in concert with the fact that you don't have to sacrifice everything in order to be, you know, a really good swimmer. Yes, there are going to be some things you have to sacrifice, no doubt, but not everything.
That's so true. And when I look back and see all of the success that you had in Ann Arbor, and you had some great assistant coaches that we'll get into more of our connections later, but what was your message to the staff at the beginning of each season to kind of help them foster those relationships and that trust between the athletes on your roster and your coaching staff members?
You know, I don't think I really had to give a message at the beginning of the season, because I tried to hire people who shared the same philosophy, the same type of empathy and caring, the same, I don't want to say necessarily the same style, but irrespective of the style, the caring and the empathy was always there. It was always behind everything, so that the swimmers would never be confused as to, why is this coach asking me to do this, or why is this happening this way?
And so much of that, coach, and the systems that you used to develop those relationships with your athletes was based on them seeing some initial success. So how did you prepare your athletes and bring them into the systems that you were using? I know that as a former assistant to Larry Van Wagner, we used a lot of the same things that you were doing at Michigan. We had that bridge because Alicia Humphrey came out of our program and had so much success with you. What did you do to bring those athletes into your seasonal plan? How did they kind of know that this is where they needed to be in that part of the season?
Well, the first thing was to give them as clear an understanding as possible of the nature of our training philosophy. And John and I, make no mistake about it, we were distance oriented, but in the latter years of my career, I want to say the last 10 years or so, 12 years, I became more interested in diversifying to accommodate the needs of sprinters, which I have to credit Sam Freeze a lot there, because Sam was, in my mind, one of the great sprint coaches out there. And so I spent a lot of time with him, but notwithstanding, it was always, even in the recruiting process, we were very clear about our use of the color charts, the fact that we were very aerobically based, and we would show them sample workouts. Although they would come in and be able to see a Saturday morning workout, we would do a handout, which we would take up later, because back then you couldn't provide, I don't think, those types of materials. But we were very clear about our philosophy and the science behind it. And so that's how we, integrated beginning in the recruiting process. And then the first few days of the season, we would have classrooms on understanding aerobic metabolism and anaerobic metabolism and alactate metabolism, and a little bit of information on biomechanics, because I'd spent a fair amount of time, in graduate school and in biomechanics also. So that's how we did it.
That was great. So it was almost like a crash course for your athletes in swimming physiology.
Very much so. I've always been the kind of person who believed if you don't understand why things are the way they are, you can't own it. There's no way you can own it. So that just means you have to be compliant to authority, whatever that authority is, and irrespective of what that authority knows or what they don't know. So once people understand the why behind what you're doing and how you're doing it, then there can be meaningful questioning and interchange, rather than an authoritarian down from the top. I've got a couple of examples of swimmers who, after a couple of years, came to me and said, I don't think this training's working for me. And they got better, but not significantly better. And we changed their training, and they went from being a non-NC2A scorer to finishing second in one event and having the fifth fastest time in the other event, winning the Conso finals. And that was always a good source of, well, if you'd done this with me earlier, and mine was, no, all the work we did before allowed you to do this when we made the change. So she was very open about it and good natured about it. She didn't feel like she had missed out on anything.
And that's a credit to the relationship that you had with the athletes, which is at the core of this. And when we talked to Coach Urbanchek earlier this year, he talked about sitting down with you and his wife and coming up with those color charts. And talk to me about, what was the athletes' reaction when you first started utilizing that? I mean, this is a system that we use firmly in place here in my program at Victor, that came from Marist Swim Club, that came from University of Michigan. And that story is similar to many teams across the country. So when you first started implementing that program, this is a great piece of swimming history for our coaches and our parents and our athletes to learn about. How did the athletes respond to it?
Well, they didn't know any better because nobody else was really doing it in a structured way like this. And we didn't really know what we were going to get, because it had never really been done before in this format. John and I kept meticulous records of the T30s, and we started out right away with T30s, and we learned a lot. It took us a couple of years. I remember we started out doing them in stroke because work is specific. If you're a backstroker, but you're not doing aerobic backstroke work, you're not building aerobic capacity into your backstroke. You're building it into freestyle. And one of the things we learned is don't have your butterflyers do it. Our butterflyers got better and better at a T30, and they got worse and worse at the 100 and 200 butterfly. They had, at the end of the season, our 200 butterflyers were really bad. So we sat down and talked about, okay, what are ways we can build aerobic capacity into the butterflyers? And we developed them. I used a former swimmer of mine's methodology, Bailey Weathers, who was a longtime coach, more recently the director of swimming at the Olympic level for Cayman Islands, and great coach at Notre Dame in South Carolina and Southern Illinois. And so I adopted his methodology for butterfly, but we definitely had the backstrokers, freestylers, and breaststrokers. And in later years, I would break up a T30 into segments for IMers, part of it backstroke, part of it breaststroke, part of it freestyle. And a lot of that came out of conversation with Jan Olbrecht, Science of Winning. But yeah, the butterflyer story I felt so sorry for him. And then I had a breaststroker one year who halfway through a T30, she was a freshman, and she stood up. It was in the old pool in Ann Arbor. And halfway through, all of a sudden she stops and stands up, and she looks at me and she goes, "Whoo, I'm getting dizzy." We've got some stories of T30s, but like I said, we kept records, monitoring heart rate, monitoring speed. And from those records, we learned a lot about aerobic capacity and the development of it. And then later on, how to modify them for swimmers who just didn't have the physiology for great, i.e. sprinters, just they didn't have a lot of potential genetically for anaerobic capacity.
One thing that Larry used to say to our staff all the time was, there is no substitute for aerobic capacity. And I think that came from you and the conversations that you and he had. How often were your swimmers into knowing what their analytics were based on all of these different things that you were doing?
Always. We posted the results. We posted the results with their pace per 100 for the T30 and their heart rates immediately, post 30 seconds, post a minute, and totaled them. I did graphs. So I could see the variability within a team in terms of, heart rates, using heart rates after each. We broke it into segments and would take heart rates immediately after each segment. So we learned an awful lot about, who was really an aerobic athlete and who just didn't have those genes, and that's really part of it. Is there's a very strong genetic component to every aspect of swimming, either being a great sprinter or being a great distance swimmer. And you get the rare athlete who sits in the middle, who can do it all. They can go fast on short stuff, and they swim great T30s. I think of Brent Lang for John, could do that. I had Amy McCullough, who she split 22 flat on a 200 free relay for us and could swim under 10 minutes for 1,000 in season in the middle of training. That's rare. That's really rare. But, the testing would always reveal where people were and what kind of potential they might have.
Sure. And what are you saying, Coach, to those athletes that maybe came through a high school program or a club program where they weren't used to doing volume and they weren't used to valuing aerobic capacity? How did you help them navigate that space when they were doing their first T30?
We always split the team in half for team 30 for T30s, and each swimmer had a partner. And the upperclassmen would certainly talk to the freshmen, and they knew when they were going to do a T30. We didn't surprise them. So I'm sure outside of the pool, there were a lot of questions, but our upperclassmen and upperclass women had done so many of them, they would tell them, look, don't worry about this. It's just a matter of doing this and learning something from it. It tells you to some degree where you are, but certainly your psychological outlook towards it has a lot to do with the amount of effort you're going to put into it. And that's something that is going to develop over time. They're going to be better their sophomore year than they were their freshman year. And that's understood. I mean, that's just part of learning something new.
Absolutely. Was it a source of pride that you were training in a way that was really challenging and others knew it was really challenging? Was it a source of pride for you and the staff that you had that works mentality in your program?
I don't know so much pride. I always had the thinking in the beginning, this is an experiment that seems worth trying, and we're going to learn a lot from it. There wasn't really a pride thing there. It was trying to explore this research that Melanie, John's wife, who's a PhD in exercise physiology, found this article, gave it to John. John brought it to me, and then I threw it on to Lotus 123. We didn't have Excel back then. So it was this whole process of learning and what are we going to discover here, and not knowing how long it was going to take us to discover. Could we discover something? How long would it take? But it seemed to be something that had scientific validity and therefore was worth adapting to what we were doing and trying. So it wasn't, there was really no pride involved. I mean, John always used to have this saying, when you walk in the back door to the pool, there's a shelf there, put your ego on it and walk onto the deck, because it's about each of the swimmers and trying to do everything we can to help them be better in the pool and out of the pool both.
I love hearing that and knowing some of the story. It's absolutely true. Talk to me about what the thought process is as a coach of a major program in a major conference where there's so much history and you're taking a calculated risk with the training. What's the thought process that goes into that?
Well, when you're not very good, meaning you don't have a lot of great athletes, it's not as scary. But when you've started to get very good and you're at a place that really isn't focusing on, long-term development, you're at a place where you got to perform now. And if you don't, and I've been there, if you don't, there are going to be consequences, because we're not paying you this amount of money to finish here. And so consequently, I think it's a little easier to experiment in programs where the outcome for a particular season isn't weighed as heavily as the process that you're utilizing to learn something. I've always looked at it like every year is an experiment. And, in colleges and universities, part of your job, if you're a professor, is to, hypothesize certain things and then get your graduate students to go do the research to see whether what you're thinking is valid or not. And I think coaching swimming is very much, it's a lab experience, and trying to find out things from other people and deciding whether this could be implemented, in your program, and then having the courage to do that, understanding the environment that you're in and what the implications of that may mean. Yeah, I mean, those are all factors you have to consider as a coach, no doubt. No doubt.
When you're in a season, coach, and an athlete is struggling, and maybe they're not only struggling from a swimming standpoint, but maybe it's academically, maybe they're having a tough time adjusting to college life. What are some of the things that you put in place to help get that athlete back on track? And how do you manage those very emotional times as a 19, 20-year-old, coming in, expecting to perform at the Big Ten and at the NCAA level, much different level of success than maybe they have had in high school? How do you help that athlete quantify that and get through those tough times as an early student athlete?
Well, you have at a place like Michigan, you have a lot of support people in the athletic department. So we're very fortunate. We have sports psychologists. We have a social worker who really is great. And Greg Harden worked with us for years. And Greg, well known for his work with Tom Brady, well known for his work with Desmond Howard, but he worked with any athlete that we would say, Greg, I think this would be a person for you to spend time with. So a lot of it, because you can't, as a coach, when you're dealing with 20 some odd, athletes, you can't always connect with them. And sometimes being the head coach, it's just, there's some things there that some athletes don't want to get into with the head coach for whatever reason. Having a great assistant coach, really important. But identifying the people around you in your department or even outside of your department who are willing to work with student athletes who are trying to negotiate whatever issues are keeping them from really being happy, fulfilled, productive, and contributing people on your team. So yeah, that's my thing has always been try to surround yourself with some professional people who that's their expertise. They know what they're doing.
No doubt about it. And how about managing those expectations? You're at a place like Michigan, you know, because I'm biased more so than others, understand some of the weight of that. But representing a university like that expects to win Big Ten titles, expects to be in the top 15 at NCAAs every year, how did you help the athletes kind of figure out their place and their role on the team?
I always tried to shield them from that. We never talked about that. We didn't. If any discussions came out about what we could do or whatever, it came from the team, came from internally within the team. But our position was always for you to be as successful as you possibly can be here, to utilize all the resources around you and take care of the process. I used to tell the people, the swimmers, don't let 3 days in February or 3 days in March define you. Those things can happen. It's great when the things that happen are wonderful. But in a career, there are going to be times when they aren't going to be. And what defines you is who you've been all season long, day after day. That's what defines you, and that's what we want to value. Being disappointed in performances that were not what we had hoped for experience, absolutely. I'm that kind of a guy. Because I want it so badly for them. When it doesn't happen, I'm really disappointed. And it was always hard for me. I couldn't hide my disappointment. And I tried to, but they could tell. But it was important to know that I wasn't disappointed in them. My thinking was always, what did I miss? What did I not see when I should have seen it? What did I miss so that next time this won't happen?
Coach, 14 Big Ten championships. What if you had to go back and look at probably the number one cohesive, collaborative thing that helped those teams be successful? If there is something, what would you say it was?
Great internal leadership within the team, great senior captains, great people within the team. Those years, the captains really took their role seriously, not in bringing people in line, but in connecting with people. So when things weren't right with them, they would invite a swimmer over for dinner and have dinner with them and talk with them about, well, what's going on. And, it was the internal leadership and dynamics within those teams. And some of them honestly weren't that good at that. They were just talented. We just had a lot of talent, but the ones that I really remember the most were, and actually one of those teams was Alicia Humphrey's senior year. And Jenny Almeida was her co-captain, and they just did a remarkable job of taking care of business within the team so that as coaches, we weren't putting out fires. We weren't tied up mentally, emotionally with issues. We could coach. We could really coach. And so that to me is a key element for any coach to hopefully have on a team. And I will tell you that those things may be impossible to have happen every year. Richard Quick told me after the meet at Texas when they won and we finished second, and Richard and I became good friends. And he said, Jim, you've got a problem now. And I said, what's that? And he said, you just swam the perfect meet at NC2As. And anything from now on is going to be potentially a disappointment. And we both laughed. But I understood. And those years are the ones you hold as the standard, and anything less than that, it's going to be somewhat disappointing. But I think that it's good to have those examples that it can be done. It can be done. And yeah, so, but there's no substitute for great leadership within the team. None. Because if you don't have it within the team, then the coaches have to take on that role. And now they're doing something besides coaching. Now they're having to manage dysfunction and leading and, keeping people where they need to be and all that kind of stuff. And that's draining too. Takes energy. Sometimes more than just riding a workout and running it.
That's great perspective and so true. And you hit on so many different topics that affects coaches throughout the season there. And you're right. I mean, what expectation after a season like that? Talk to me, Jim. You've had these athletes go through your program, and I'll just use Alicia for an example. After Michigan, she goes to Harvard. She gets a degree from Harvard and then goes to Wisconsin and gets a law degree. I mean, what an exceptional person. And I know that you really value how successful your student athletes are after the experience. So, what are some things that you hoped your athletes would walk away from their 4 years at Michigan?
Be a great person. Be a person who makes a difference. And that difference doesn't have to be in the world of academia and then social service. It can be having children and rearing children to be great people who they're going to make a difference. I never felt that any of our athletes had to achieve something monumental in the world sense after they graduated. It was about them. Like I said, whatever they chose to do, whatever path they took, that they were going to make a difference in those around them. And they've all chosen different paths. I mean, we've got some MD, PhDs, some lawyers, some moms, some, have significant other partners. And they've all made choices, I hope, on the basis of some of the things that we tried to teach them, but certainly those things could never be a substitute to the things they learned at home before they came to us. And those are the things that I think you hope to get people that what we're teaching meshes very nicely with how they've been reared before they come to Michigan.
And that's a great segue to my next point was you have mentored so many great assistant coaches. Another, Marist Swim Club connection, Stephanie Kurska,
Hmm.
a longtime assistant. I think you guys are still working together in some capacity, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And Stephanie's nephew, Mark Anderson, was one of my best swimmers as he was coming up through our program at Marist Swim Club. Talk to me about why it's so important for you to have developed those great coaches over the years. As a board member of ASCA, it's something that I'm seminally interested in, and we want to educate our young coaches. Talk to me about why coach education has always been important to you. You were the director of the College Swim Coaches Association for a time. You've been a member of ASCA forever. So why is that such an important part of what you did and what you continue to do now?
I think a lot of it has to do with elevating the level of professionalism that you see in coaching. Through the years, I had the opportunity to interact and watch, sometimes from afar, coaching styles, coaching behaviors, and I would often scratch my head because some of them didn't seem to jibe with everything I'd learned in graduate school, in my sports psych classes and sports sociology and the like. And actually, right now, I'm part of a small committee of about 5 people and for USA Swimming, and we're actively right now writing the coaches certification curriculum for USA Swimming, which we hope to have come out in formal form in 2022. So I'm very actively involved with setting up the curriculum for elevating the level of professionalism, knowledge based for coaches. I know with Stephanie, at one time she had come up through Larry's program and swam for John while she was in high school, and then swam for me, and then came back after coaching high school. After a while, I told her, I said, well, she came to me and said, I want to know more about coaching. So I sent her to Bill Martin, our athletic director, who was the former head of the USOC, to talk to him and get his advice about leadership. And then I gave her a couple of books from my library to read because she had no background in physiology and the like. So, and she spent a lot of time with John. So it really grew her, as a coach, and advised her to go down to Matt Kredich's School of Thought in Knoxville, Tennessee, where she met Jan Olbrecht and Matt and got more involved. And one of the byproducts of that is this year, boys high school and girls high school teams won the state championships in Michigan, and the first time for Pioneer High School in a long time. So, and she's worked as the manager of the U.S. Olympic team. So she was hungry to learn, and she wasn't afraid to get into things that weren't her sweet spot, in terms of knowledge and understanding. So I think if you're going to be the best coach you can be, you have to do that. You have to seek knowledge that you don't have, find people who are willing to share. And most of the great coaches I've known growing up, Doc, rest his soul, some great conversations with him. Even when he was in a wheelchair, he'd come to women's Big Tens, and we just talk about training. And Gus Stager at Michigan, and had conversations with Nort Thornton and Stefan Vidmar, who was Swiss but in Australia, and Jan Olbrecht. And I just was never afraid to contact these Steven Seiler, who does stuff in Norway's and exercise. I was hungry for knowledge, still am. And I think that you need to be that way as a coach. You can't be too settled in what you know. I think that the way I evolved using the charts is kind of a good example of that. Is I morphed them based on sprinters and events and things like that, and frequency, and sometimes starting the year with a T15 and not a T30, and building it up to when we would do our first T30 might be December instead of starting right away in early October with it. So, it's this hunger to learn more, and then be able to look at what you're learning and figure out, how am I going to apply this to where I am and the swimmers that I'm working with.
It's just such an amazing experiences that you've had, and the people who have worked for you, and everybody speaks so highly of you in that experience. And it's just great to hear, like, this is the experience of a coach. And when you're in this profession long enough, you get to do some pretty cool things, whether it's at the University of Michigan or whether it's down the road at Swim Club XYZ. All of it is as valuable, and you can really feel that in speaking with you. And I do want to take some time today to talk about my mentor, who had a very close relationship with you. And I joke with him, Jim, because this year the unthinkable happened and he finally retired. I would ask Larry 10 years ago, I said, "Hey, coach," he's like, "Yeah, I got one more." And then it would be 7 more.
Sounds like her band check.
Yeah, he did such a great job. And I know that he sent you several swimmers while at Marist Swim Club, and, a relatively small team in Poughkeepsie, New York, and created national teamers, put some people on some really good USA swimming teams. Talk to me about your relationship with Larry, and he learned so much from you that kind of trickled down to our program at Marist.
When you meet certain people, when you speak the same language and you're on the same page about what's really important. We were at the time, we were really getting into this color chart stuff, and probably, if I could go back and redo that relationship, I would have spent more time with Larry asking him, what did you do that you felt moved the needle? But I think it was probably pretty similar, because the adaptation to our program by his swimmers was almost seamless. And I do think that was totally due to him, because I think he prepared his athletes well for what was going to happen next. So, he's with a relatively small group of coaches that I've been so blessed to have relationships with, who you're just on the same page, and you can not talk for 4 months, but pick up the phone and it's like, you've been on the deck with them every day. Those are the coaches I wish that I'd lived closer to, so we could have gone out to have lunch. And this was way before Zoom became popular. So sitting on a phone call, is kind of a stale phone call, was, it was not the greatest thing. Better than nothing for sure. But yeah, just, and I think Larry's a great example of, you don't have to be a high profile coach at a Division I Power 5 school to be regarded as a great coach by people who really have a pretty good idea of what a great coach looks like. And Larry's one of those for sure. I just advised a coach yesterday who was looking at a Division I program, Power 5, and I advised, be very careful that that's what you want. Be very careful, because you're going to work 12 months out of the year, and you're going to be up till 11:30 at night making recruiting phone calls, and recruiting never stops. And the pressure to recruit the next athlete who's going to replace the great one who just graduated. If you like that kind of stuff, and you don't need to spend a lot of time with your family, or you try to make it up with 1 or 2 weeks a year when you're still making recruiting phone calls, be very careful that's what you want, because that's what Power Five Division I, in my opinion, has become.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Coach, because that's one of the last bullet points I have to talk to you about today. And a career, over 30 years coaching swimming. And talk to me a little bit about, coach work-life balance, because even as club coaches now, I'm going on 21 straight days here with no days off between meets and practice, and I have to be very careful with the amount of time that I'm putting towards running our club, because there are so many other important things happening with my children, with our family. And so, talk to me about how you balance that, and you did it wonderfully at a Power Five school. So what are some considerations coaches need to think about?
Well, I think number one, it's easier to do in combined programs because you have five, if they have the finance, you have five full-time coaches. You have a head coach, and then you've got two paid full-time assistants, and you can get a volunteer for each. So now you've got 7 coaches on deck, and you just take, 50 people and divide them by 7. That's a 7-to-1 ratio. If you're in separate programs, not as good. And you can also have highly specific training groups, which reduces your workload in terms of writing workouts, because you don't have to write for every group. And the distribution of labor there. All right, this coach is going to do travel. This coach is going to do, scholarship. This coach is going to do this, that. And so you're not, this coach is going to recruit athletes only in this area. So that helps make things better. I know Frank Bush, when he was at Arizona, he required one coach on his staff every summer to take the whole summer off. They weren't going to be on deck. They weren't going to coach. They had time with their family. I thought that was brilliant. Much easier to do in a combined program when you have 7 people coaching. So I think that when you're looking at a career, and honestly, when I came to Michigan, my wife and I made the commitment that she would not work full time, because we had 4 children and a new baby who was born actually in December, my first year. And we're kind of traditional Southern, people where the wife stays home and the husband works. And I knew then that I had to build swim camps during the summer, because I had to have, I didn't pay swim coaches a whole lot back then, a little more now, but so I had to do that. And it's not easy. It's just not easy. And I do have regrets. I do have a lot of regrets I wish I had been able to do more of this with my children. I always tried to make up for it by, when we went on training trips, particularly when we went to Hawaii, I would take the family as often as I could, and tried to have those special moments, but they kind of understood dads. And I get it. I mean, get up at 4:45 in the morning, leave the house at 5 o'clock, get to the pool at 5:15 because there's no traffic then. And so you're going over that morning workout. It starts at 6, but you're there at 5:15 to be sure everything's okay with the pool. The lights work. There's no filter problems, because none of the workers are doing that at 5:15 in the morning. The lane lines are all okay. So you run that workout from 6 to 8, and then from 8 to 9, you get ready for your run with John or Banchek. We're out running 9 to 11 miles from 9 to 10:30 or so. You come back in, you go over some emails at that point. You have lunch in your office, rarely leaving the office. Then while you're doing that, you kind of go over recruiting. Then about an hour and a half before the 3 o'clock workout, you're going over that workout, editing it based on what you saw in the morning. You do that workout from 3 to 5, and then you're monitoring the dry land training from about 5:15 to 6:30. And then you get in the car and go home, and you get home 7:45, If it snows, you get home at 8:30 because of traffic. And then you throw something in to eat and you start recruiting. And you're doing that 12 months out of the year. I remember one year we took a vacation. We go to Emerald Isle, North Carolina still regularly and love to surf fish, but we won't go there yet. And in the afternoons and evenings, I have to come in and make some recruiting phone calls. Is that really a vacation? That's always there. It's always there. So, the opportunity to get away, I mean, really get away for any length of time, I think is important. And through the years, as I got a little older, I realized a week wasn't enough. I needed 2 weeks, because if it's just 1 week, you get there on a Sunday and you're decompressing for about 3 days. And then, you've got to leave in 3 days. So you don't really have enough time to decompress and debrief yourself and just really get away completely and relax. So I think self-care for coaches is really, really critical. I mean, I've seen some friends of mine leave the sport this year, but I think the pandemic, for some of them, caused them to reevaluate their lives and how they were living it and how much time they weren't spending with their family. I think of times John and I would go out for a run and we'd run into Bo Schembechler, and Bo would be driving in for work. This was out of season for football when we were going out for a run at 8:30 or 9. And he would always pull his Jeep over, and John and I would stand there and have a conversation with him. And he loved John because John just gave him crap. And Bo loved it. Bo absolutely loved it. And I remember one time we were sitting there on Dewey Street right in front of the football building. And he looked at us, he said, "You swimming coaches are crazy. You're crazy. You work all year long and you don't get paid 1/10 of what football coaches and basketball coaches get paid." And he was right. I mean, he was right in that regard. But I think we all do it for the love of the sport and the love of working with kids. We've just got to do probably a better job of evaluating our self-care and the priorities in our life when it comes to your own children and your wife or your significant other versus the demands of the job. So I'm not sure that, and I don't think Division I is making it easier. I couldn't believe it when they allowed the recruiting of juniors. I couldn't believe that. And all of a sudden your recruiting workload just doubled. Just what you need, right?
Exactly.
Sarcastic, but I call them like I see them. And the irony in all this is that we're spending all this time trying to convince somebody to come to your school, and you're just feeding their ego. And then what do we expect when they come to your school? I expect you to take care of business and become a mature person. So all of a sudden the script gets flipped, and because coaches aren't doing it with them anymore, they're doing it with the people they're recruiting now. So I think the whole recruiting thing is, if it's done right, that means you get the people who are fit for your school first, and then for you as a coach and your staff. But if you're just out there recruiting talent alone, that you can do that in some institutions. That'll last a pretty good while, but I'm not sure that has sustainability in the long run. Not sure about that.
Great perspective on many fronts there, and I cannot wait to share that Bo Schembechler story with my father. He will get such a kick out of that. He loves some Bo Schembechler stories. Coach, I want to transfer now into some quick fire questions that I have for you. And, you don't have to disclose your famous hidden fishing spots, but freshwater, saltwater, what's Jim Richardson prefer?
Saltwater.
Okay, all day. If Michigan is playing Wake Forest in the NCAA tournament, who are you rooting for?
I want the team that plays the best to win, and that's not an out. I've always been that way in watching contests. Uh, I don't, I don't pick favorites a whole lot. If I do, it's because I know something about the philosophy of the program and how it's run. And those are the programs I like to see.
Coach, your swim camp was a breeding ground for many great coaches this day and age. We're the beneficiary of one, Scott Wisner, who's on my staff. He swam at the University of Iowa. He's a big Jim Richardson fan. How challenging is it to run that swim camp every summer? And you had a lot of great people. Kathy Walker worked with your swim camp for a long time.
Greg Meehan, who's at
Yes.
Stanford. Oh, come on, brain freeze. I've got a brain freeze. We've got head coaches all over the country who've worked at our swim camps. These camps were a lot of work. I'm fortunate I have a background in database construction. So if it weren't for FileMaker Pro, they would have been even worse. It would have been a tough job. But I always enjoyed getting things organized. I would turn the staff hiring over to my assistant coach. And of course, John would suggest some people. But we knew the kinds of people that we wanted to have in those positions. And of course, we had a lot of people like Susan Teeter. When she was at Princeton, her assistant was Greg Meehan, and she recommended Greg come to camp, go to Michigan camp and work there. And we've had, we've just been blessed to have, a lot of great, Dan Schimmel, who's at Stanford men's coach. We had both of their coaches, on staff with camp. And I want to credit Kurt Kerner, who's the head coach at Hillsdale College, and Roger Carnes, who's leaving Lewis University now. Both of those guys, great guys, and they helped create an atmosphere among the coaches during camp where they were involved with everything, and even had the option between sessions to come in and watch Club Wolverine train. Yeah, so I think that it was great. I mean, the camps, and I still direct the Michigan swim camps. So it's always great to see young coaches come in who are hungry to learn, and then the kids come in who want to get better. There are few environments in life like that are that much fun.
I love to see you get excited about that. What is more advantageous, elite level puller or elite level kicker?
Depends on how far you have to go. Good question. Well, if you're a breaststroker, you better be a great kicker, because you're going to be in trouble if you can't kick. When we teach the strokes, we always start with a kick. After we do the boomer balance platform, we start with a kick. But if you've got small feet, then you better be a good puller. Better be a really good puller. So I tend to look at anatomy a lot to determine which area is probably going to be a strength. But boy, if you got somebody with big feet, long arms, and big hand paddles, and they've got the physiology, just get out of their way. Get out of their way.
I love it. Will 8 minutes go down in the women's 800 freestyle at Tokyo?
Well, I think, Katie's looking pretty good now. And Ariana, I think she came close to breaking 4 minutes at their trials in the 4. I'm not sure whether she did or not. I have less of a read on her. I think it's pronounced Ariana.
Yes.
But that'll be a great race. Potentially that'll be a great race. And if you need anything to take you under there, it's two people who are well matched and well ready to help each other go faster, which kind of reflects our philosophy. We never wanted to swim against, we always wanted to swim with, because when you're swimming with somebody who's going to push you like you can't push yourself, that's when real greatness, I think, comes out.
Okay. Does it take a sub 21 second performance for the men's 50 freestyle to win the gold medal?
I think it does. I think it does. I think the focus on speed, there's so many guys out there now. They're big, and I think technically swimmers are better now than they were 4 years ago. I, I think it does. I think I think there are enough guys out there that, when Caleb steps up there, he's gonna know he's gonna have to meet the challenge. Yeah, it's gonna be great.
The Coach Marsh said something to me the other day. He's like, if the 50 was the first day of the Olympic Games, we'd probably see some faster times.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, that's why for years we talked about rearranging the event orders and adding another date to NC2As. And especially when you had trials and finals in the 800 freestyle relay, we were wearing out people. I mean, they were just getting, that's why the teams that were large and had big teams, they could hold some people out. There was one year we qualified first with our 200 freestyle relay at NC2As, but Carolyn Joyce was sitting on the bench for Georgia and somebody else was sitting on the bench. We ended up third. We swam great. No complaints. We swam great, but yeah. So, when your meet lineup is, and I think David's right as rain there. I think that speed event, if they're swimming hundreds and relays, stuff like that, that's where your aerobic capacity comes in for sprinters, how well you recover.
Yeah, that's one thing that Larry used to hit home with us all the time, whether it was, the club or the college, and we want to be the best team on the last day. And there's one way to do that.
Yep.
All right, Coach, the next question is your favorite fish of all time. I saved the best one for last. Where were you? What kind of fish was it? What were you using?
I was using a Penn Spin Fisher 3500 with a St. Croix 9.5-foot steelhead rod, 15-pound braid with a 20-pound mono leader fluorocarbon. It's a gold lure with a treble hook on the back. I'll think of it later. I was at Emerald Isle, North Carolina. The water was really blue and beautiful. I came up to the condo, second floor condo, right on the beach, just behind the dunes, to get something to drink and have a bite to eat. I had a piece of sandwich in my mouth and I looked out the window and I saw the false albacore busting within 20 feet of the shore at high tide. We had a king tide, high tide, and they were just busting the surface. I ran down to the beach, grabbed my rod out of the stake, threw one cast of it out there, hooked up right away. 15 minutes later, I put a 12-pound false albacore on the beach. That was epic. Probably the second one would have been steelhead fishing in the Muskegon River during the steelhead run in the spring. That came close, but that one was that. I'll always remember that one. That was, and I just love beach fishing because it's a challenge every day. It's something new and trying to figure out where the fish are going to be and what they're going to feed on. And I don't care whether it's a 18-inch flounder or 2-pound bluefish or a redfish or pompano. Pompano fishing is a blast. So I just love walking up and down the beach and looking for underwater structure, meaning sandbars and sloughs, and figuring in rips, rip currents. Just it's trying to figure things out. And I didn't come by
connected to swimming for me.
I hired a guide who used to teach PhD at the University of Michigan, who lives down in Emerald Isle. And we spent a day on the beaches and he taught me everything, and it's totally worth it. So, it's not unlike coaching. If you don't know how to do it, find somebody who does know how, who's willing to tell you. You'll save a lot of time. And in fishing, you're going to catch a lot more fish a lot sooner, rather than just sitting on the beach, soaking bait and wondering why everybody else is catching fish and you're not, or sitting on the deck looking at other people's swimmers going really fast and your swimmers aren't. Start asking.
I love it, because I was just going to ask you to as your parting gift to us today, because this has been a remarkable hour. One piece of advice to that coach in their first year, whether it's high school, club, or college.
Reach out. Start reading. Part of it is you need to be discriminating, particularly today, because there are lots of people posting things online just to try to get, people to think they know a whole lot. So you got to be discriminating. And I say to help that is to reach out to coaches who've been there and done that. They not only have the knowledge, education base, but they've got the experience. They've been there, been through the ups and downs. I would also say, try to become a part of a group. Try to get a mentor, and try to become a part of a group of coaches who are willing to share what they've done and what they've learned from it. So education, and then mentoring, and then consulting with other coaches who maybe have a little more experience than you do.
No doubt about it. Coach, thanks so much. How can some young coaches get in touch with you if they have questions after watching the episode?
Yeah, my email, they can do umswim at the number 1. umswim1, the digit, at gmail.com. And glad to help as much as I can. A lot of times it'll just be, here, read this book. Go download this book and just sponge it up. Learn everything you can, and then see if you can figure out how to employ it in your program.
All right. Well, hey, listen, Coach, thank you so much. This has been such an awesome hour. And I will certainly send you an email this November, the day before the Ohio State game. We'll get some energy up, and hopefully we can start turning things around.
Good stuff. Yeah, we've got a ways to go, man. We got a ways to go, but we need both of those teams to be good so the game means something.
Yes.
Got to start meaning something, Yeah.
Well, Coach, thanks so much, Jim, and look forward to seeing you in some capacity soon. Hopefully we'll be able to do that at whether a convention or something like that. Wish you all the best this summer at swim camp, if you can get that going, and hopefully Michigan starts to track back in the right direction. Yeah, I'm sure they will eventually. Take care, Coach. Appreciate it. Tight lines. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Take care, Coach. Right.